Well, nobody watched when I talked about trying to imitate film, so I guess let's try talking about actual film. I didn't get into photography in a way that would make sense to most people. I learned cinematography and like video first, and then actual photography, like my interest in actual photography, came a little later down the line. And there has to be at least a little bit of irony in the fact that I've gotten now into film scanning in a similarly odd way. I'd started wanting to scan my own film negatives mainly due to cost. The cost of getting a roll of film developed and scanned at a high enough resolution, it's kind of pricey. It's like $25 a roll versus if I was just getting negatives developed, I'd only be paying, $7 a roll. And so for a long time there was a bunch of negatives from like years ago, like 2019, which I guess that is years ago, were just sitting in my fridge, just waiting for me to get around to feeling like they were worth spending money on, and then not feeling like they were worth spending money on. But I had looked into all the different options for scanning. I had looked into like a flatbed scanner, like an Epson scanner, but a lot of people say that's not great for 35mm film because the negative is so small, you're not getting enough resolution out of a flatbed scan. I looked into getting a proprietary 35mm scanner, and then I had, had a lot of interest in DSLR scanning, or scanning, with like a digital stills camera. I just didn't have one. The only digital stills camera I own currently is a Nikon D200 from like 20 years ago. So it still didn't feel like I had the ability to get into DSLR scanning or stills camera scanning without investing in a digital stills camera that's a high enough resolution. But that was until late last year when I had a thought. Well, I had more than a thought. I had a read. And I realized that most of the cameras that I had been looking at, digital stills cameras, had about a 20 megapixel sensor, could shoot 6K video. And I already had that, a camera with around a 20 megapixel sensor that could shoot 6K video. Not only that, it's a camera that had stills in the name, digital stills and motion camera, DSMC. I realized I had the camera, I had a macro lens, this IRIX 150mm macro, and so all I needed was a cheap like DSLR scanning kit, and I would be home free. So I got out my macro lens. I found the cheapest mount to camera lens film holder I could find, and decided to try it out. It ended up being not perfect. This camera is not quite a full frame sensor, but it's still smaller than full frame, plus a 150mm macro lens. All the extension pieces that came with this film holder weren't quite long enough to get the film far enough from the lens to have the entire frame of the still in frame. And so I had to get a lot of step-down rings here to adapt the film holder, and then to extend it out further from the camera, I got this piece of acrylic tube off of Amazon, and it looks really stupid, but Bob's your uncle. I wanted it to all be one unit, that way if I really wanted to, it all comes apart in one piece. That was a big thing for me, because a lot of people, if I can get this back on here, incidentally, this old red Epic dovetail plate that's quick release is awesome. I don't know why they didn't keep making them. But I wanted it to be all self-contained versus the system that a lot of people have where they're using like DSLRs and digital cameras. It'll be mounted to a stand, mounted to a table, which is nice, but I just wanted it to be just one unit. So the light is mounted to everything. It's all one piece. So the process that I've come up with here is pretty simple. We have a piece of film. In this case, it's wrapped in a little extra piece of protective plastic. This I've already scanned, so I don't care if it gets dirty. It was just a junk roll. So we take it, we put it in the film holder, and thankfully these all came not cut, which normally I get my film cut, and since this film holder can hold 6 frames at a time, I was able to cut them to just be 6 frames, but we line up the spaces between the frames so that everything is you know, each frame you can see the whole thing. Then we take it, I make sure that it's not upside down or backwards, and we put it in the film holder, which actually I can do from either side, but I'll just put it in the middle for now. And then on here I have a little aperture MC that has the rubber dome, so it's as diffused as possible. Really, it'd be nice if I had a slightly punchier light, or a light with the same amount of diffusion but a bit more output. This is just what I've been using for now. Really, I could do it with one of my MC Pros, just to be able to stop down the lens a little bit more. At a minimum, I try to keep the lens around a 5.6, just so that it's relatively sharp, and it's such a tight focal length on a macro lens, your depth of field is like razor thin unless you can really stop it down. And then I've been rating the camera at about 1200, 1280 ISO, just because the process that I'll get into in a bit of how I post-process everything and convert the negative is definitely the wrong way to do it, but it makes the ISO work in reverse. And so I've found that starting at a higher ISO, I'm just preserving more of my highlight dynamic range even when I invert the negative, just to maintain as much highlight detail on the film as possible, because I try to expose the film as bright as possible without clipping in the camera. And so far that seems to be the right thing for this process. I'm not entirely sure if that's the correct way to do it, but for this workflow, it's working so far. Okay, so this is like the fourth take of this. So film, so once film is in the film holder, I will advance to whatever the frame that I'm starting with is, and then it's easier to show if I have it stuck out a little. Can you go into that? So I'm not sure if other film holders or DSLR scanning setups might be a little less sloppy than this, but there is some play in the film holder, so for each frame I have to kind of hold it and line it up, and then once that's set, I'll hit record for a second and immediately cut it again, and that's it. That's one. I just slide over to the next, I frame up. Occasionally I'll punch in on the camera to just make sure that I have the grain in focus, so that way I know that I'm focused on the physical film. And then I'll just advance to the next one, get to the end here, get to the last one, hold it, roll, cut. I don't even need that much. I could do it probably quicker than that and be fine. And then that's it. Then I just move on to the next one and just keep going for hours and hours and hours, roll after roll after roll after roll. And so once we have frames in the mag here, I had to do something with them. Now, I'm used to editing photos in Lightroom, but I didn't have anything specific to convert negatives, because I'd never done it before. And so I didn't want to spend money on something like Negative Lab Pro without being able to just know that the process is worth spending the money on. And so I decided to try something crazy. I decided to try to convert the negatives in DaVinci Resolve, because I'm used to working in DaVinci. It's the only color grading software and editing software I use for video. And if I can color correct a feature film in Resolve, why couldn't I edit photos in it? So that's that. Okay, I hate watching people do things on screens as much as everybody else, so we're going to try to do this as efficiently as possible. So as you can see, we have our image here of the lovely Mark Twain from Disneyland. But how did we get here? Well, we have 6 nodes that are going to take us from just a complete raw negative to a beautiful image. So this is a process that is loosely based on an article I found online that is written by somebody whose name I can't pronounce, but I will link it down in the description. I have, however, somewhat tweaked it to where I can get the image that I'm looking to achieve in a way that makes sense to me. What we're going to start off with, I just threw 5 nodes down, but at this first node we are going to go to add a node and add a layer.
which is going to create another node below our main one here, and also a layer mixer, which we are going to take the composite mode and change it to subtract. And our image is gone because we've done a bad job. And then we are going to take a color generator effect, which I have conveniently already searched for the 4 other times I've tried to record this. And, well, that happens. But what is that? Well, first we need to turn off the node, grab our little eyedropper, and we're going to select the darkest part of the image that we can find, which of course in a negative is the brightest. And so I think maybe right in here on the paddle wheel, maybe, or I think this time I'm going to try underneath the roof line here, because that looks pretty dark. And it looks awful. Well, it's going to keep looking awful for a while. Real quick, I'm going to jump down to the other end of our tree here, and I'm going to put on a color space transform, because we need to get from our red IPP2 color space to Rec 709, which is our timeline's color space. And so we're going to do that with classic color space transform, and then everything looks a lot worse. And we're going to continue to not panic because we know what we're doing. And we're going to go down to this second node here below our first main node and go to key output and change that to 0.87, because that's going to make it a little bit better, but it's still not great. And so then what we're going to do is come to our raw settings, which in here, our color temp is set to the color temperature that I scanned the film at. That we're not going to change. We're going to make sure that specifically for our red raw settings that the chroma noise reduction is turned off, because now that we've inverted our negative, it will do weird, gross things if we leave that on. So we're going to make sure that that's turned off, and then we're going to come to our ISO, and we're going to bump it down, which is going to make the image brighter, because that makes sense. Usually I'll bump it down to around 500 or 400, and then as we are editing the image later on, we can play around with that a bit still. But now we can move on to our first node where we're actually going to try to make the image not look like trash. We're going to do that by coming to our fourth node here, and we're going to take our luminance mix here, crank it all the way down, which is then going to, in our curves menu here, unlock each of these channels to work at least relatively independently of each other. Now this workflow, using a color space transform at the very end, makes our different channels kind of play off of each other and adjust each other as we go, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. This is the process I've worked out. I'm not an expert at this by any means, so take everything I'm doing with a grain of salt, and we're going to keep going. So we're going to grab our red channel here and just bring it up higher than we would probably think. Usually I try, knowing what part of the image has the most white in it, I'm going to try to bring that up just all the way to the top, because then when we move on to our green channel and start to bring it up, the red channel is going to start to come back down, because that makes sense. And our goal here is to just try to get a very neutral yellow, not too greenish yellow, not too reddish yellow, so that then we can bring up our blue channel. And we're just looking for a general white balanced image as best we can. It's not going to be perfect, but we're going to make it perfect as we go. And so I think that's pretty good. But obviously, it's still a very flat image. And to fix that, and also to make up for any color casts that we might have in any of our shadows, we're going to go to the bottom of the curves and start bringing them down. Again, the red a little bit further than you would think, to the point where the image is kind of teal, to then bring down our green channel to a somewhat similar amount until things are looking kind of purplish blue, and then bring down our blue channel. But I think we need to push everything a lot further just to start getting the contrast that we're looking to get. because that's also part of what we're doing here, is we are trying to get to a certain level of contrast. And so that's getting us somewhere, but we can now push our exposure back up a bit more as well. Maybe we'll play in here. I think this is a point we can work with. So now, in our next node here, which I'm going to spread these apart just so I can keep track of them. In our next node here, so we can actually start playing with the image to just start getting a level of contrast that feels right and a level of exposure that feels right. And we could also, if we wanted a little bit more saturation, we could play with that, but I think I like where it is for now. And then one other thing that we can go ahead and do while I'm thinking about it is add some sharpening. Now the way I've been doing it is kind of a basic way that probably our Lightroom and Photoshop aficionados aren't going to like, is just bringing up our mid-tone detail here to a point that feels nice, that just feels like, from zero here. And this was a photo taken on a very old soft lens, so I'm compensating for that a good little bit. And also our mid-tone detail also kind of plays into our contrast to make that feel a little bit punchier. So in this one, it's just all the way up, but I feel that looks pretty good. And so our other node here is for a neon suppression LUT, which sometimes I use, sometimes I don't. That just kind of depends on if the image feels like it is pushing either too saturated or too unnatural in any of the color channels. I may throw that in. That's also been more useful in some of the older film that I've scanned, which we'll get to in a second. But honestly, yeah, here we go. Here's our image. It's not properly cropped, and you're seeing not the whole thing, but what we can do for that to get ourselves lined up here is I already know from experience that I need to punch in about 0.7% more, and then we just scoot over, because as you can see, there's more image over there. And just find what seems about right, which we will go with right there. And voila, we have an image. How close did we get to our original? Or what I considered my end product last time? Pretty good. I actually didn't need to crop in as much. And this one seems a little bit brighter. But otherwise, I call that a pretty good job.
So once I had a process in place, I had a promise to keep. I had promised my family that when I finally got into film scanning, that I would scan all of our negatives, going back all the way to the 70s that they had kept. And I'm talking about photos that they hadn't seen, I hadn't seen my entire life, pictures that probably no one had seen since they were even taken, because my family was always very choosy about what they actually got prints made of. And so I figured a good Christmas present for my family would be to surprise them with finally scanning so many negatives.
What's going on?
Hey, Gavin. Gavin. Hello.
Hi.
Oh, look
It's
at Brent.
Yep.
Yep, that's
That's
Brent.
my bedroom.
That was his bedroom. Can we look at the bottom border of his walls?
Right
What
here.
is that?
That was the wallpaper.
And why was your curtains peach?
Well, that's me.
Stop.
Help me.
Yeah. Oh, there's my Panama Jackrabbit shirt.
Yeah, I remember that shirt. Hold up. Why do I have hot pink socks on that do not match? right? And again, haircut.
And it's so cool to see like this because you know they have this because this is part of
Which one?
The,
Which one
the
of the parks?
Swiss Family Robinson. Yeah, that's the treehouse that you can walk through.
Epcot or...
No, that's just in Walt Disney World. And
So that's Magic Kingdom.
yeah, that's Magic Kingdom.
And what's the animal one? Animal Kingdom, right?
Yeah, Animal
They
Kingdom's
did not have the Animal Kingdom back then.
yeah.
They didn't?
No.
So they had...
All they had was the Magic Kingdom and Epcot.
Yeah,
and that was
it. Okay.
That was out in the yard.
Yes, so that was
That's
Steve and
Easter.
Julie. But now hold on, keep going. So in this part,
Oh, let me make it bigger.
the adults have hidden the Easter eggs at Mama and Meemaw Winnett's for the kids to find. So we were going through looking for Easter eggs.
I know this.
But after, and yet Meemaw Winnett's helping, and once we all found all the eggs, then, and there I am, and they actually someone had a little puppy that year. Once we found the eggs, then us kids hid all the eggs for the adults when the adults went in and drank their coffee and had their cake. Well, this particular year, instead of hiding the eggs, they would just start chunking the eggs. These are hard-boiled eggs, real eggs, chunking up on the roof.
Wait,
And
what
you
about the
hear no
stars?
plop, plop, plop. Okay.
Let them land.
So I've learned a lot in my continuing photography journey, and I hope you've learned something too. In the least, I hope that you've learned that an unconventional solution to a problem is still a solution to a problem, even if it looks silly. So go shoot some film, go make some memories, and I guess I'll see you in the next video that you're probably not gonna watch. Cut, good enough. There's something in there. Actually cut, cut. Oh, I'm gonna fall down the hill cutting this camera. Okay, good, you've been rolling the whole time. Poor little dumpster cam.